If I was starting an architecture firm today, a newly emerging firm, these are some of the things that I would focus on. So, the first thing I want to nail is specialization and positioning. The temptation when you're a young firm is to go for whatever opportunity you can in whatever vertical. And partially that's just from a lack of opportunity. So, when opportunity comes along, we want to say yes to everything. We don't want to say no to certain kinds of work. But the second part of it is that we are emerging, we're honing our craft. We want to have a variety of different experiences that we can learn from, and that's all good. But I would be thinking, if I was in the shoes of a newly minted director, about the idea of picking a particular vertical based on my unique strength or where I have the most experience. So, a firm that does or did a really good job of this was Wowowa. When they started their firm, they were residentially focused. They made their tagline "Life's too short for boring spaces," so they had a clear positioning, and they set qualification rules on their website, which were that we only work with people who plan to live in their home for 5 or more years. And then they tried to own that positioning. The other part of what WOWR did that I would also replicate if I was starting a firm would be a heavy investment in quality branding and quality website design. I think those are two areas where with just a little bit of money, you can easily get a brand perception advantage over most other architecture firms because their websites are crap. So that would be something that's just an easy edge. You don't have to be a better architect to have a better website. Now, the second thing I would look at doing would be overcoming the problem of not having a portfolio. Even in your first year, you may not have a project complete, and it's going to be a real problem for you to put together work. So I would be looking at the example of Matt Goodman at MGAO Studio. So Matt spends a lot of time designing sort of speculative, unsolicited projects. The way he sort of describes it is he just has ideas and then he draws them. And that's really that simple. I mean, architects have been doing that for 100 years. Nothing's changed there. You design something to communicate your idea, then you shop it around and see who's interested. What we've seen from emerging firms that do that is that they are very successful at building an audience without a great deal of built work. They don't have to deal with the kind of compromises in a real project. And they're able to create something that people really, really enjoy looking at, and it produces a lot of inbound leads. The other part of that that's really beneficial is it allows you to enter into new verticals where you don't have a client. When Matt was on my podcast, he talked about how he had an idea for a building that he always wanted to design for a winery. He designed it speculatively. He reached out to a winery that he followed on Instagram, and it just so happened that they were looking for a design for something just like that. So I would be dedicating a fair amount of time to speculative work, just simply to post on my own social media accounts. What you could do to take that a little bit further would be the kind of Trias studio model where you try to kill two birds with one stone by also focusing on your unsolicited work being part of competitions and awards. So the idea would be that you're choosing competitions that will allow you to essentially design what you want internationally. But there is also the possible upside of a bit of recognition and press coverage when you get that, and expanding the kind of audience around your work. Not only does that provide you kind of accolades that you can talk about during that critical element of your practice where you're trying to build trust, but it also helps you to get the exposure. But secondly, it tells an interesting story. If a design studio locally in Australia in a small sort of domestic market is recognized internationally, that adds a lot to the brand. Really, it does, to show that they're internationally recognized experts or internationally recognized talent. That's massively useful as a persuasive story to help to sort of jumpstart your reputation locally. Now, the next thing I would be looking at would be what happens when I have my first built project. The approach that I would be taking here would be based on the one followed by John Elway, an architect who has recently released Terrarium House via his website, where his website really is taken over by this one extremely compelling project. He's gone to that extra level that most firms don't go to, where there is a lot of great photography. There is an absolutely beautiful video that he's invested in the project. And he's also written extremely persuasive copy around the project as well to really just immerse his website visitor or his prospect in this one project. So I would be taking a bit of a less is more strategy. Whatever work I do have, I'd be going into incredible depth to communicate it and investing as much into that project as I possibly can in terms of choosing a photographer that I typically wouldn't be able to afford. I would probably be absolutely loss leading on my initial projects. I'd take whatever money I had made, I'd spend it on photography and video because those are going to serve as assets to bring you a lot more work. So that less is more strategy when it comes to work. The way I like to relate this to my clients is think about two retail outlets in a shopping center. On the one hand, you've got Kmart, which is trying to have as much range as possible, as much choice and variety, and they're absolutely stacked with different types of items for you to buy. And then on the other hand, at the other end of the shopping center, we have Louis Vuitton, Prada, Gucci, who have much fewer items, but they place a lot more emphasis on them. So it's a less is more kind of strategy in retail to reach a more sophisticated, a more affluent kind of client. The same thing kind of follows for architecture. I don't like to see a firm pad out its portfolio and follow the kind of big W strategy of we have everything you need. I prefer to focus on things being succinct, considered, consistent, and intentful so that your client gets a sense that you're very deliberate. And then I would go into an enormous amount of depth around each of those projects to really, truly flesh out their stories rather than taking a kind of hamster wheel approach as the years go by of just adding new photo galleries to my Squarespace website. I would be really, really investing in those few key projects. In fact, I wrote an article about this on my blog talking about Takahara Tezuka in Tokyo, where the director is still talking about their most prominent project 15 years after it was complete. Although they've done many more projects, they still talk about the best project because it most accurately reflects the best of what they can do. Only when there's a better project will the focus shift to a new project. So I don't recommend always replacing your work with the new. You should always be emphasizing your best project, your absolute best one, and continuing to emphasize that project and harp on about it and tell new people about it and share that story with people in new and interesting ways until you do something better. Because really what we want to market on is our best work. We don't want to market on the average of all the work that we've said yes to and all the opportunities that we haven't been able to resist. So that's a bit of a wrap up of the things that I would be focusing on if I was starting an architecture firm in 2019. Hopefully that's interesting advice, whether you're starting a firm, have started one recently, or your firm has been around for donkeys and you're just looking for a different perspective. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'd love to get your feedback. Or if you have any other topics that you're interested in hearing about, drop them in the comments on LinkedIn and I will be able to make videos about those in the future.